In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky. Chapter 8. Gurdjieff began his next talk as follows. Man's possibilities are very great. You cannot conceive even a shadow of what man is capable of attaining. But nothing can be attained in sleep. In the consciousness of a sleeping man, his illusions, his dreams, are mixed with reality. He lives in a subjective world, and he can never escape from it. And this is the reason why he can never make use of all the powers he possesses, and why he always lives in a very small part of himself. It has been said before that self-study and self-observation, if rightly conducted, bring man to the realization of the fact that something is wrong with his machine, and that his functions in their ordinary state. A man realizes that it is precisely because he is asleep that he lives and works in a small part of himself. It is precisely for this reason that the vast majority of his possibilities remain unrealized. The vast majority of his powers are left unused. A man feels that he does not get out of life all that it can give him, and that he fails to do so owing to a definite functional defect in his machine, in his receiving apparatus. The idea of self-study acquires in his eyes a new meaning. He feels that possibly it may not even be worthwhile studying himself as he is now. He sees every function as it is now, and as it could be or ought to be. Self-observation brings man to the realization of the necessity for self-change. And in observing himself, a man notices that self-observation itself brings about certain changes in his inner processes. He begins to understand that self-observation is an instrument of self-change, a means of awakening. By observing himself, he throws, as it were, a ray of light into his inner processes, which have hitherto worked in complete darkness. And under the influence of this light, the processes themselves begin to change. There are a great many chemical processes that can take place only in the absence of light, exactly the same way many psychic processes can take place only in the dark. Even a feeble light of consciousness is enough to change completely the character of a process, while it makes many of them altogether impossible. Our inner processes, our inner alchemy, have much in common with those chemical processes in which light changes the character of the process, and they are subject to analogous laws. When a man comes to realize the necessity not only for self-study and self-observation, but also for work on himself with the object of changing himself, the character of his self-observation must change. He has so far studied the details of the work of the centers, trying only to register this or that phenomenon, to be an impartial witness. He has studied the work of the machine. Now he must begin to see himself, that is, to see, not separate details, not the work of small wheels and levers, but to see everything taken together as a whole, the whole of himself, such as others see him. For this purpose, a man must learn to take, so to speak, mental photographs of himself at different moments of his life and in different emotional states, and not photographs of details, but photographs of the whole as he saw it. In other words, these photographs must contain simultaneously everything that a man can see in himself at a given moment: emotions, moods, thoughts, sensations, postures, movements, tone of voice, facial expressions, and so on. If a man succeeds in seizing interesting moments for these photographs, he will very soon collect a whole album of pictures of himself, which taken together will show him quite clearly what he is. But it is not so easy to learn how to take these photographs at the most interesting and characteristic moments, how to catch characteristic postures, characteristic facial expressions, characteristic emotions, and characteristic thoughts. If the photographs are taken successfully, and if there is a sufficient number of them, a man will see that his usual conception of himself, with which he has lived year to year, is very far from reality. Instead of the man he supposed himself to be, he will see quite a different man. This other man is himself, and at the same time not himself. It is he as other people know him, as he imagines himself, and as he appears in his actions, words, and so on, but not altogether such as he actually is. For a man himself knows that there is a great deal that is unreal, invented, and artificial in this other man, whom people know and whom he knows himself. You must learn to divide the real from the invented, and to begin self-observation and self-study. It is necessary to divide oneself. One must realize that he consists of two men. One is the man he calls I, and whom others call Ouspensky, Sakharov, or Petrov. The other is the real he, the real I, which appears in his life only for very short moments, and which can become firm and permanent only after a very lengthy period of work. So long as a man takes himself as one person, he will never move from where he is. His work on himself starts from the moment when he begins to feel two men in himself. One is the passive, and the most it can do is to register, to observe what is happening to it. The other, which calls itself I, is active and speaks of itself in the first person, and is in reality only Ouspensky, Petrov, or Sakharov. This is the first realization that a man can have. Having begun to think correctly, he very soon sees that he is completely in the power of his Ouspensky, Petrov, or Sakharov. No matter what he plans or what he intends to say, it is not he, not I, that carry it out, do or say it, but his Ouspensky, Petrov, or Sakharov. And of course they will do or say it not the way I would have done or said it, but in their own way, with their own shade of meaning. And often the shade of meaning completely changes what I wanted to do. From this point of view, there is a very definite danger arising from the very moment of self-observation. It is I who begins self-observation, but it is immediately taken up and continued by Ouspensky, Sakharov, or Petrov. But Ouspensky, Sakharov, or Petrov, from the very first steps, introduces a slight alteration into the self-observation, an alteration which seems to be quite unimportant, but which in reality fundamentally alters the whole thing. Let us suppose, for example, that a man called Ivanov hears the description of this method of self-observation. He is told that a man must divide himself, he or I on one side, and Ouspensky, Petrov, or Sakharov on the other. Ouspensky, Petrov, or Sakharov on the other. And he divides himself literally as he sees. He divides himself literally as he hears it. This is I, he says. That is Ouspensky, Petrov, or Sakharov. He will never say Ivanov. He finds that unpleasant, and so he inevitably uses somebody else's surname or Christian name. Moreover, he calls I what he likes in himself, or at any rate what he considers to be strong, while he calls Ouspensky, Petrov, or Zakharov what he does not like, what he considers to be weak. On this basis, he begins to reason in many ways about himself, quite wrongly, of course, from the very beginning, since he has already deceived himself in the most important point, and has taken not his real self, that is, he has not taken Ivanov, but the imaginary Ouspensky, Petrov, or Zakharov. It is difficult even to imagine how often a man dislikes to use his own name in speaking of himself in the third person. He tries to avoid it in every possible way. He calls himself by another name, as in the instance just mentioned. He devised an artificial name for himself, a name which nobody has ever or will ever call him, and he calls himself simply he, or, and so on. In this connection, people who are accustomed in their mental conversations to call themselves by their Christian name or surname or by pet names are no exception. When it comes to self-observation, they prefer to call themselves Ouspensky, or to say Ouspensky in me, as though there could be an Ouspensky in them. There is quite enough of Ouspensky for Ouspensky himself. But when a man understands his helplessness in the face of Ouspensky, his attitude towards himself and towards Ouspensky in him ceases to be either indifferent or unconcerned. Self-observation becomes observation of Ouspensky. A man understands that he is not Ouspensky, that Ouspensky is nothing but the mask he wears, the part that he unconsciously plays, and which, unfortunately, he cannot stop playing, a part which rules him and makes him do and say thousands of stupid things, thousands of things which he would never do or say himself. If he is sincere with himself, he feels that he is in the power of Ouspensky, and at the same time he feels that he is not Ouspensky. He begins to be afraid of Ouspensky. He begins to feel that he is his enemy. No matter what he would like to do, everything is intercepted and altered by Ouspensky. Ouspensky is his enemy. Ouspensky's desires, tastes, sympathies, antipathies, thoughts, opinions are either opposed to his own views, feelings, and moods, or they have nothing in common with them. And at the same time, Ouspensky is his master. He is the slave. He has no free will of his own. He has no means of expressing his desires, because whatever he would like to do or say would be done for him by Ouspensky. On this level of self-observation, a man must understand that his whole aim is to be free from Ouspensky. And since he cannot, in fact, free himself from Ouspensky because he is himself, he must therefore master Ouspensky and make him do not what Ouspensky has given, what the Ouspensky of the given moment wants, but what he himself wants to do. From being master, Ouspensky must become the servant. The first stage of work on oneself consists in separating oneself from Ouspensky mentally, in being separated from him in actual fact, in keeping apart from him. But the fact must be borne in mind that the whole attention must be concentrated upon Ouspensky, for a man is unable to explain what he himself really is, but he can explain Ouspensky to himself, and with this he must begin, remembering that at the same time he is not Ouspensky.